Well, the first thing Coldwater Crossing noticed was the bag. Not the woman carrying it. The bag. It was made of dark canvas, patched at both corners, with a brass clasp that had been polished by years of use. It sat at Clara Wren's feet outside the mercantile, while Mrs. Odell held up a little blue bottle for the whole street to see. "This is what she sold me," Mrs. Odell called out. "Colored water and promises." Market morning had pulled half the valley into town. Men stood outside the harness shop with flour dust on their boots and came out of the dry goods store with folded cloth over their arms. 2 teamsters stopped loading salt barrels just to listen. Mrs. Odell knew how to use a crowd. She had always known. "She says she can heal," she went on, pointing the bottle at Clara as if it were evidence in a courtroom. "But a decent woman does not wander alone from settlement to settlement with a bag full of powders. A decent woman has a home, a husband, and a name people can answer for." Someone laughed. Then someone else laughed because the first person had. Clara did not reach for the bottle. She did not defend the tonic. She did not explain that Mrs. Odell's nephew had been coughing for 10 days before anyone called for help, or that no syrup on earth could make a damp bedroom warm and dry. She simply stood there with gloved hands folded at her waist. She was 27 years old, though the hard travel made people guess older, and the quiet face made people guess colder. She'd been called healer in one town, witch in another, and fraud in more places than she cared to count. So she knew the first rule: never argue with a person who wants an audience more than an answer. Across the street, Silas Bell leaned against the rail outside the blacksmith's shed. He had come in for hinge iron and stayed because the crowd had grown sharp around one woman. Silas was not known for stepping into quarrels. He had buried his opinions deep and used them sparingly. But he watched Clara's hands. They did not shake. Mrs. Odell lifted her voice again. "If she has any shame, she'll take that ragged bag and move on before she hurts somebody who can't afford to be fooled." That was when the shouting started from the road beside the saw shed. 2 men came running, with a boy between them. The boy was 13, maybe 14, with his face gone grey, and his right hand wrapped in a grain sack that had already turned red. Behind them, the mill wheel kept turning, slow and black in the cold water, as if nothing had happened. "It's Nate Purdy!" someone yelled. "The blade took his hand!" The crowd opened too slowly. People are often quick to judge and slow to make room. The men carried Nate to the mercantile porch because it was the nearest flat place. His father stumbled behind them, white around the mouth, saying the doctor's name over and over. But Dr. Larkin was not in Coldwater Crossing. Days north on a mining circuit, and the snow in the pass had been falling since dawn. Silas stepped off the rail. He looked once at the boy's hand. Then he looked at the patched canvas bag at Clara's feet. "Can you saw flesh?" he asked. It was not a challenge. It was a door. Clara bent, opened the brass clasp and said, "Boil water, bring a lamp, and find me the cleanest table you have." No one laughed after that. They put Nate on the long counter inside the mercantile, pushing aside bolts of cloth and jars of molasses. Clara rolled up her sleeves and laid out her tools on a square of boiled linen. There was no flourish in it. A little knife, a curved needle, thread in a waxed packet, a brown glass bottle, and strips of clean muslin folded so neatly they seemed to rebuke the whole room. "Hold his arm," she told Silas. He did. Nate made one sound when she opened the grain sack. His father turned away, but Silas stayed where he was, one hand around the boy's forearm and the other resting solidly on his shoulder. Clara cleaned the wound until the water in the basin was pink, then red, then pink again. She found what could be saved and what could not. The blade had taken the tip of one finger and split the next two, but the tendons were not gone. That mattered. The clean edges mattered. The warmth still in the fingers mattered. She did not explain every decision to the room. She had learned long ago that fear wants talk, but wounds want order. So she gave the wound order. Stitch by stitch, breath by breath. The mercantile door filled with faces. Mrs. Odell stood near the back with the blue bottle still in her hand, though no one was looking at it anymore. By the time Clara tied the last thread and wrapped the hand, Nate was crying silently. He looked ashamed of it, which made Clara's voice soften. "You will keep the hand," she said. "It will hurt. You will hate the splint. You will do as I tell you anyway." Nate nodded, because boys that age will obey a person who speaks to them like they are already brave. His father tried to pay her with shaking hands. Clara only asked for boiled cloth and a quiet place to sit for 10 minutes. Silas paid for the cloth before anyone could argue. Outside, the street had changed shape. The same people were there, but they had rearranged themselves around a fact they did not know how to name. The boarding house was full with freight men waiting out the pass. The church vestry was damp, and waiting out the pass. The church vestry was damp. The jail had a stove, but no woman in town would have let Clara sleep there without making it another trial. Silas told her his place was 3 miles south, with a spare room off the kitchen and its own outside door. He said it plainly, no pity, no shine put on it. "You can stay until the pass clears," he said, "or until the doctor comes back." Clara looked at him for a moment, then at the bag by her boot. "Does your spare room have a lock?" she asked. "It does." "Then I'll come." They rode out near dusk on Silas's buckskin. Clara sat behind him with the canvas bag across her lap and the cold working through her coat. The town fell away behind them. The road ran between frozen fields, then up toward the Bell place, where the cattle moved like dark stones against the winter grass. The spare room was small. A cot, a stove, a washstand, and one narrow window looking toward the barn. It was not much, but the door closed properly. The stove drew well, and Silas left a stack of split wood beside it without making a speech. Clara set the canvas bag near the cot. She opened it, checked every bottle, every packet, every needle. Not because she doubted them, because order was how she stayed alive. By morning, the story had already outrun the horse that carried her. By the second day, people were finding reasons to come to the Bell place. An old miner named Judd came with a cough that rattled down low in his chest. Clara listened with her ear against his back, eyes closed, her face turned inward, as if she were reading the sound. She made him a steam pot, showed him how to sleep propped high, and told his daughter to move his bed away from the north wall where frost crept in at night. A girl came with a burn across her wrist from hot lard. Clara cooled it, dressed it, and scolded the mother for buttering it. A ranch hand came with a thorn buried deep in his palm. He said it was nothing. Clara said nothing does not turn purple. Word moved. So did suspicion. Coldwater Crossing had not decided whether Clara was a gift or a danger. It only knew, for the moment, that she was useful. That was something she understood too well. Useful got a woman fed. Useful got a woman a bed by the stove. Useful did not mean safe. It did not mean wanted. And it certainly did not mean known. Silas watched the town come and go. He noticed that Clara spoke lower when children were frightened. He noticed she never placed a sharp tool where a patient could see it too soon. He noticed that after every visit, no matter how tired she was, she returned each item to the canvas bag in the same order. Left pocket for bottles, right pocket for thread, tin box for needles, book in the back wrapped in oilcloth. He said little about any of it. Silas had built his life out of work that did not need talking over. Fence lines, calving nights, roof repairs, accounts that balanced only when he took less for himself. But quiet was not the same as not seeing. By the end of the first week, the house had changed without asking either of them. Clara rose before the sun and filled the kettle. Silas came in from the barn with frost on his coat and found coffee waiting on the stove. Sometimes there was cornmeal fried in grease, sometimes only bread and the last of the preserves. One morning, she stood at the window with a cup in both hands, watching the cattle nose through crusted snow. Silas poured his coffee and said, "You sleep?"
"Some,"
she answered. He looked at her. She added, "More than I usually do." He did not ask why. That was what made her almost answer. A few evenings later, he came in late from the south fence. Supper sat covered near the stove, and Clara had her notebook open beside her plate. It was full of small writing, measurements, symptoms, names, weather, and remedies that had worked or failed. "You did not need to wait," he said. "I didn't," she replied. "The beans were waiting. I was reading." He almost smiled at that. They ate while the wind pushed at the walls. After a while, Silas told her the lower pasture gate had split at the hinge. Clara told him Nate Purdy's fingers were warming properly, and that the boy would likely use them again if infection stayed away. Silas looked across the table. "You think it will?" "I think I caught it before the wound decided otherwise." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. And somehow, in the small kitchen with winter worrying the windows, the sentence felt more intimate than a compliment. The first real question came on a blue evening when the sun had dropped behind the ridge, but left a thin line of fire along the snow. Clara was sitting on the bench outside the kitchen door, her hands empty for once. Silas came out with 2 cups of coffee and gave her one. For a while they listened to the barn boards tick in the cold. Then he said, "Who taught you?" She knew what he meant. "Ada March," she said. "A midwife over in Willow Bend." "Family?" "No." He waited. Clara looked at the darkening field. I was raised at the county home. Ada came when children was sick. I followed her until she let me carry water. Then I followed her until she let me grind herbs. Then until she let me touch a patient. Silas held the cup between both hands. She died when I was 23, Clara said. Me the bag, 2 books, and a letter saying the road would be hard because people trust a doctor's coat faster than a woman's hands. That true? She gave a small laugh with no humor in it. You were in town. Silas looked toward the ridge. You ever stop? I stop where somebody is hurting. That was not what I asked. The quiet after that was different. Clara could feel the answer sitting in her throat, but it had no practice coming out. I don't know how to belong to a place, she said at last. Only how to be needed by one. Silas did not turn it into comfort. He did not tell her she was wrong. He only sat beside her while the light thinned. He said, "Need is a poor roof." Clara looked at him. He stood, took her empty cup, and went inside before the words could become too much. The rumor arrived in the 3rd week. It came on a mail wagon from Elk River and passed through town faster than flour through a torn sack. A woman had died there, people said. A mother. Clara Wren had been in the room. The family had blamed her. Maybe the baby, too. Maybe there had been no baby. By noon, the story had grown teeth. Mrs. Odell did not invent it, but she fed it. The next day, fewer people came to the Bell place. No one came until sundown, and the woman who did arrive would not meet Clara's eyes while asking for fever powder. Clara gave it to her anyway. Silas heard the rumor from 2 men outside the livery. He did not speak until they had finished making certainty out of things they had not seen. Then he paid for oats, rode home, and split wood until the axe marks went deep and clean. When he came inside, Clara was at the table with the oilcloth book open, though she had not turned a page. He hung his coat. "There's talk from Elk River," he said. Her hand stilled over the page. "Yes." Silas crossed to the stove but did not pour coffee. "Tell me. Not explain yourself. Not defend yourself. Tell me." Clara closed the book. "The baby was crosswise," she said. "They waited too long because the husband would not send for a woman who traveled. By the time I got there, the mother was bleeding, and the child had stopped moving." Silas stood with his back to the stove. "I tried until morning," she said. "Ada's book says there is a point where the body has already chosen the ending. I have never hated a sentence more in my life." The room held still around them. Clara looked down at her hands. They needed somebody living to blame. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That is not the same as guilt." She looked up. It was not forgiveness in his voice. It was something steadier. Belief without performance. Her throat tightened, and she hated that more than the rumor. Silas poured coffee then, set a cup near her, and left the room as if he knew staying would make her break. By the 5th week, Dr. Larkin sent a letter instead of returning. He had taken a post near the railroad where the pay was steady and the travel shorter. No one in Coldwater Crossing could blame him. They blamed him anyway for about half a day, then began doing what frightened towns do when the official answer disappears. They came back to Clara. Not loudly, not all at once. A broken thumb from a wagon tongue, a fever that rose too high, a woman in labor with no time for pride. Nate Purdy's dressings, Judd's chest, a baby who would not keep milk down. If the call came at night, Silas had the horse ready before Clara reached the door. The first time she stopped on the step with the canvas bag in her hand. "You don't have to ride with me." "I know." The horse stamped in the moonlit yard. After that, she stopped saying it. He waited outside cabins while she worked. He stood in barns, kitchens, back rooms, and once in a smokehouse while a man with a cut scalp cursed enough to shame the rafters. Silas did not enter unless she called. He did not take over. He only made the road less lonely and the dark less wide. Then Mrs. Odell came after midnight. She knocked at the outside door of Clara's room with her bonnet crooked and her pride in pieces. Her nephew's cough had turned thin and barking, and each breath sounded like a door trying to open against a chain. Clara did not mention the blue bottle. She took the child inside, set water to steaming, mixed what would loosen the chest, and sat with him until the worst of the sound eased. Mrs. Odell watched from the corner, with both hands pressed against her mouth. Near dawn, when the boy was sleeping, Clara wrapped the bottle in paper and placed it in Mrs. Odell's palm. "Keep him warm, not hot, warm. No damp bedding." Mrs. Odell looked at the paper, then at Clara. "I was afraid," she said. Clara knew it was not an apology. It was closer to the truth than most apologies ever got. "Most people are," Clara said. After that, Mrs. Odell did not defend Clara in public. She did something more useful. She stopped poisoning the room. Winter tightened. Clara worked until the bones of her face looked too fine under the skin. A difficult birth kept her away 2 nights in a row. When Silas brought her home the second morning, she walked inside, sat in the chair nearest the fire, and forgot to remove her gloves. Silas took the canvas bag from her hand and set it where she could see it. Then he made coffee. She did not drink it. By the time he sat in the other chair with a strip of harness leather, her eyes were closed. The fire cracked low. The house settled into its night noises. Her head tipped once, slowly, then found his shoulder, as if it had been looking for a place all winter. Silas went still. Not because he wanted to move away, because he understood the size of what had been given. He sat like that until the lamp burned low and the fire fell to coals. Clara slept with one hand curled loose against her skirt, the other resting near the empty space where the bag usually sat. Near morning, he eased out from under her without waking her, laid a blanket over her shoulders, built the fire high, and carried the canvas bag to the hook beside the kitchen door. Not hidden, not in the spare room, in the house. When Clara woke, the first thing she saw was the bag hanging there like it had been expected. She looked at it for a long time. The cattleman brought the last herd down from the high graze on a Saturday, and Coldwater Crossing held its winter supper in the square that night. Lanterns were strung from the mercantile to the church fence. Somebody played fiddle near the pump. There were pies, beans, roast beef, and too many people pretending not to watch Clara arrive beside Silas. She wore the same dark dress she used for church calls, brushed clean at the cuffs. Her hair was pinned back, though one loose strand kept catching the lantern light. For the first hour, she stood near the edge of things. Old habit, useful enough to be summoned, not certain enough to step fully in. Then Silas came from the far end of the table and stopped in front of her. "Dance with me," he said. The square seemed to hear it before Clara did. She glanced at the people, at the fiddle, at Mrs. Odell standing very still near the cider barrel. This will give them something to discuss. They discuss plenty without help. He offered his hand. Clara placed hers in it. Silas was not graceful, but he was steady. The kind of steady that made a woman stop guarding her weight. They moved through the lantern light while the town watched and slowly forgot to pretend otherwise. When the music ended, he did not let go. "Walk with me," he said. They left the square and followed the dark edge of the road where the fiddle became a thin sound behind them. Snow shone in the ditch. The ridge stood black against a sky full of cold stars. Silas stopped near the closed smithy. "I have been trying to say this plainly," he said. "That sounds dangerous." "It is." Clara's breath clouded between them. Silas looked at her, not around her, not past her. "The town needs what you know," he said. "That is true, but it is not why I am asking." She did not move. "I want you at the Bell place when there is no fever," he said. "When there is no wound. When nobody is knocking, books on the table and your bag by the door and your coffee going bitter because you forgot it while reading." A small, helpless sound caught in her throat. "I am asking you to stay," he said, "as my wife, if you want that. Not because you are useful." The word useful stood between them like an old enemy finally outnumbered. Clara thought of the first morning in town, Mrs. Odell's hand high with the blue bottle. She thought of Nate's blood on the mercantile counter, Judd breathing easier, the Elk River mother, the road, the nights, the hook by the kitchen door. And then she thought of Silas asking who taught her, as if the woman behind the bag had mattered before the medicine did. She reached for his hand. "Yes," she said. "I want that." Silas closed his fingers around hers, and for once, neither of them looked toward the town to see who had noticed. They were married 3 weeks later on the church steps because the church stove had gone out and nobody wanted to wait for the building to warm. The minister kept it brief. Silas had asked him to. Clara carried no flowers. She carried Ada March's little oilcloth book, tied with brown ribbon. Nate Purdy stood by the church door, with his splinted hand held carefully against his coat. Judd came wheezing but upright. Mrs. Odell came late, sat in the back, and left a folded square of embroidered linen on the table, without a note. When the vows were done, Clara stepped down beside Silas and looked toward the road south. The canvas bag was not in her hand. It was already hanging by the kitchen door at home. By spring, Silas had built a narrow room onto the old tack office on Main Street. It had a proper door, 2 windows, a stove, shelves for bottles, a table scrubbed pale, and a hook beside the entrance. Clara hung the patched canvas bag there on the first morning. People noticed. No one joked about it. The boy who had nearly lost his hand came by to show how well his fingers bent. Judd brought eggs and pretended they were payment. Mothers came before coughs turned dangerous. Ranchmen came before wounds went hot. Even Mrs. Odell brought her nephew in daylight and waited her turn like everyone else. The town never became gentle all at once. Towns rarely do. But it learned a slower kind of respect. The kind built by proof, by time, by hands that keep showing up after being doubted. And on quiet afternoons, when the stove ticked and the horses sounded from the livery yard, Clara sometimes looked at the bag by the door and remembered the day it had been used against her. A ragged thing, they had called it, a fraud's prop. But in Coldwater Crossing, it became something else. Not a trick, not a shield. A sign that someone had stayed.